Hey guys, my name's Pocket and today we're going to be talking about Nami. Nami is an enchanter support with a focus on healing and she's one of my favorite champions right now. So we're going to be going from the absolute basics all the way up to the niche little tips and tricks that are really going to help you master her. As usual, I'm going to put timestamps in the video description, and if you've got any questions then leave a comment or you can come catch me live on stream and I'll definitely get back to you. To start, we're going to take a look at Nami's abilities and her passive, so let's just get straight into it. Nami's Q is Aqua Prison. Nami sends a bubble towards the target area and it lands after 1 second. When it lands, it deals magic damage to all enemies that it hits, it reveals them, and then suspends them in the air for 1.5 seconds. This type of CC is not actually a knock-up, it's simply a stun that acts like it is knocked up for other people's abilities. This means that you can cleanse it unlike a knock-up, but say a Yasuo could ult them as if they were actually knocked up. Nami's W is Ebb and Flow. Nami sends a stream of water to a target champion, enemy or ally, which then bounces to a nearby champion up to 2 times. The bounces must alternate between enemy and allied champions, and if there's nobody to bounce to, then it simply ends. All allies that are hit by it are healed and all enemies are damaged. With each bounce, the heal or damage of the next bounce is increased. This ability can be self-cast and the bounces can come to you. Nami's E is Tidecaller's Blessing. Nami blesses a target ally champion for 6 seconds, during which time their next 3 basic attacks or abilities deal bonus magic damage and slow their target for 1 second. The amount to which they are slowed scales with the ability level and Nami's AP. This ability can also be self-cast where you simply act like an ally champion. Nami's ult is Tidal Wave. Nami sends a tidal wave in the target direction, it deals magic damage to all enemies that it hits, and it knocks them up for 0.5 seconds. When they return to the ground, they are slowed for 2 to 4 seconds based on how far the tidal wave traveled before it hit them. The amount to which they are slowed depends simply on the ability level. It's important to note that unlike your Q, this is a true knock-up, but it only lasts for 0.5 seconds. So now you know what Nami's abilities do, but what order should you level them in? Well, for me, this is very simple. We start off with W. This is your main healing ability, and it's also your main form of poke, and it's the most useful ability at level 1. Then you will level either E or Q, depending on how well you think you're going to be able to use your Q. If you're looking at the enemy and you think they're positioned poorly and you're going to be able to take advantage of a level 2 spike into a Q, then you can level that at level 2. But if they're very long range or they're positioning very well, then you can go E, which is a better offensive ability if an engage happens, assuming that you don't hit your Q. Then you will max W, followed by E, and then Q last. The reason we max W first is that it's your main damage and healing, as we've said, and its base healing and its base magic damage actually increases pretty well with level, so it's the first thing that you want to get up at those levels and get the power spike for. Next is your E, and once again the bonus magic damage per hit from your empowered E and the slow both scale really well with level, so once again it's something that you really want to get up there in the levels really early on. Q actually scales relatively poorly with level. The damage scales quite well, in fact. The stun itself is always 1.5 seconds, meaning that it doesn't scale with level, and as this is your CC ability, not so much your damage ability, it means that it's less important for this to have levels. Of course levels help, it just means it's not as good as W or E, and so it's the ability that you max last. So now we're going to talk about runes on Nami. First up, for our keystone, in every single game I'm going to choose Airy. Airy is a keystone that empowers your attacks and your abilities to send shields to your allies when you use abilities on them, or to send damage to enemies when you use abilities or basic attacks on them. This means that it not only synergizes really well with your supporting enchanter style kit, that means your W and your E can both proc Airy for your allies, but also it empowers your poke and helps you do more damage in lane. For Nami specifically, I think this is really good because Nami is quite a bit of a lane bully. You can get quite a lot of free trades and easy poke with Nami using your W and just basic attacks, so having those things empowered and dealing more damage really helps. For this reason, I wouldn't suggest the Guardian keystone on Nami. I know that it's been used with quite a lot of enchanters throughout this season, but personally I think Airy's offensive poke really helps, and then obviously it synergizes super well with your W and your E, so it's the only keystone that I'm going to use. Now Airy is in the sorcery tree, so that gives us access to a wide variety of runes, many of which can be useful, so we're going to go over them right now and talk about when you should be using specific runes in the sorcery tree. So first up, on line 1 is Mana Flow Band. Personally, I take this in every single single game because Nami can have quite a bit of mana issues early on. You're quite able to spam abilities, and if you do so, then you're just going to yourself really quickly. Therefore, part of Nami's playstyle is controlling your mana and making sure you don't spam abilities too much, and making sure that you've always got enough mana to peel for your teammates and make sure that you have your abilities when you need them. Mana Flow Band is a stacking rune that stacks every time you hit an enemy champion, and like we've talked about, Nami is quite pokey and quite a bit of a lane bully, so you can stack it really quickly, and then once it's fully stacked, it really helps to control your mana pool. Not only does it give you 250 extra mana, but it also gives you a mana regen passive, which really does help into the mid and late game. Now on line 2, we have access to Transcendence and Absolute Focus. Transcendence is a cooldown rune. It gives you 10% cooldown reduction at level 10, but it also has a passive which turns excess cooldown reduction into AP. This means that it's much more of a scaling rune. It's not very useful in the laning phase, but in the late game, it gives you a little bit of AP when you max out your cooldown reduction, and also it helps you to max out that cooldown reduction earlier. This means that I like it when I'm with a team that wants to scale and I want to be more relevant in the mid and late game, or into enemy lanes that are particularly easy and I don't really feel like I need that early game presence. Absolute Focus, however, is a much more early game rune. It activates straight away and it gives you AP when you're above 70% HP. It does also scale. It means that you get more AP from it the higher level you are, but this does activate immediately and it's much more important in lane before you've built items. Because of your self-sustain as Nami, being able to self-cast W and then bounce it onto an enemy to poke in lane, it means that you are actually quite healthy, and into most team comps, unless they are extremely pokey, like say a Caitlyn and a Zyra together, then you're going to be over 70% HP quite a lot, which means that you're often going to have the benefit of this rune. That said, it is relatively inconsistent and it doesn't scale quite as well as Transcendence, so this is better in my opinion for these early game team comps where you know you want to get ahead. Also, for obvious reasons, it's not good if the enemy do have a heavy poke bot lane, because they're just going to shove you under that 70% HP, and then this rune does literally nothing. So to sum up, we want to take Transcendence when we want to scale better, and we want to take Absolute Focus when we want more lane dominance. But we don't want to take Absolute Focus when the enemy has a lot of poke in lane and is going to be able to whittle our health down. And then for our last choice on line 3, we have an extremely similar decision to make. We have access to Gathering Storm and Scorch. Gathering Storm, much like Transcendence, scales much better, but because it only activates after minute 10, it's not very useful in lane. Scorch, on the other hand, activates immediately, but its damage doesn't scale quite as well into the late game, which means that it's much more of a lane-focused rune, and therefore we're going to be choosing between these based on how much we want to scale or how much we want lane dominance. Gathering Storm gives us AP at every 10-minute block, starting at 0 AP at 0 minutes, which means it's doing nothing, and then 8 AP at 10 minutes, etc. Scorch, however, does damage every time you hit an enemy with an ability with a short 10-second cooldown. This makes it much better in lane because it activates immediately and you get the most use out of it when you're constantly able to hit the enemy when you're both stuck in that laning phase and you're doing a lot of poke damage. So to sum up, we want to take Gathering Storm, we want to scale better, but we want to take Scorch when we want more lane dominance. However, into enemies that we just don't think that we're going to be able to hit much with our abilities in lane, then we don't want to take Scorch because we're simply not going to proc it enough to make it worthwhile. So even if we want that lane dominance, if we're just not able to hit the enemy, maybe we want to take Gathering Storm as well. These are the kind of decisions that you need to make on the fly in Champ Select, and it's something that you're just going to get used to. But if you're feeling a little stuck, look at your teammates. If you think that they are these late game kind of curb storm champions like Jax or Yi, then look towards Transcendence and Gathering Storm. But if you think that they're these early game snowball champions like Misfortune or Katarina, then you're going to be wanting to look towards Absolute Focus and Scorch. Now that sums up our primary runes, and like I said, this will be my primary rune set and primary rune choices for pretty much every game. Our secondary rune tree, however, is a little more complicated, and we're either going to go for Resolve or for Inspiration. The key runes in each of these trees that make them worth taking are Revitalize in the Resolve tree and Cosmic Insight in the Inspiration tree. Revitalize is a great rune on Nami. It increases outgoing and incoming heals and shields by 5%. This bonus is doubled to 10% when you or the target that you are healing are below 40% HP. It should be pretty clear why this synergizes great with your kit, as you have a lot of healing and you also have a little bit of shielding with Aerie as well. On the other hand, Cosmic Insight is a cooldown rune and it gives you 5% cooldown reduction. This cooldown reduction applies immediately, but what's really great about it is it actually gives you 5% increased maximum cooldown reduction, meaning that you can now go to 45% cooldown reduction when you were previously limited to 40%. And on top of all of this, it gives you 5% increased summoner cooldown reduction and 5% increased active item cooldown reduction as well. Now, how I choose between these runes is pretty simple. Once again, I'm thinking mainly about the scaling and how much I need the lane dominant. Revitalize is really great straight away in lane. It increases your sustain, that you can give to your ADC, and it helps you commit to better trades. It also gives you access to bone plating, which is a great rune in lane, especially when you're going into a heavy engaged support. Cosmic Insight, on the other hand, is a much better scaling rune, and I'll take it when I want to scale better into the late game. Now, you might be thinking, why is Cosmic Insight a scaling rune? It doesn't actually give you any more cooldown reduction as time goes on. You get the 5% immediately, so surely it's just as good in lane as it is in the late game. Well, it's not actually true, and that is mainly because of the increased maximum cooldown reduction. But there's actually a little bit more maths, so permit me to give a little bit of a lecture here, but it will really help you understand something that's pretty integral to League's cooldown reduction system, at least as it stands now, as it's set to change sometime next year. So let's imagine that we have an ability that has a 10-second cooldown. This means that at 0% cooldown reduction, we can use that ability 6 times per minute. Now, let's imagine that we've chosen the Cosmic Insight rune, so immediately we have 5% cooldown reduction. That means that the ability will now have a 9.5 second cooldown. Therefore, a little bit of maths will show that we can use just over 6.3 abilities per minute this time. And that means that we can actually use 5.2% more abilities with our 5% cooldown reduction. Now, however, let's assume that we have 40% cooldown reduction already on the same ability, which means that we have a 6-second cooldown, and that means that we can use 10 abilities per minute. If we then give ourselves the Cosmic Insight buff of 5% cooldown reduction, taking us to 45%, our cooldown will become 5.5 seconds. And with a 5.5 second cooldown, we can actually use just over 10.9 abilities per minute. Now, if we look at that, 10 abilities per minute with a 40% cooldown reduction, and over 10.9 abilities per minute with a 45% cooldown reduction, we can actually see that you can use over 9% more abilities per minute by giving yourself just 5% extra cooldown reduction. This means that 5% cooldown reduction at 40% cooldown reduction is much more important and much more powerful than 5% cooldown reduction at 0% cooldown reduction, which makes this rune a monster in the late game, whereas it's actually relatively mediocre straight away. And when we compare it directly with Revitalize, which even if we're only healing targets that are below 40% HP, only gives us a 10% increased healing, then being able to use our heal and our offensive abilities 9% more often is actually way better into the late game. Now, hopefully you've been able to follow this. It's got a little bit more in depth than we usually go in these guides, but I just really wanted to get that out there so that you can understand why I'm choosing the Inspiration rune tree over the Resolve rune tree in certain situations. Now let's talk about Nami's builds. Your starting items will always be a Spell Thief's Edge and 2 potions. On some enchanters like Soraka or Lulu, you might take Relic Shield, but I find that it's really easy to stack the Spell Thief's Edge on Nami. She also has relatively good AP scaling, so you want that extra AP, and also relatively good self-sustain, so you don't need that extra health regeneration from the Relic Shield. Our boot choices will consist of either the Ionian Boots of Lucidity, also known as cooldown boots. These are pretty simple. They're the cheapest boots in game at just 900 gold, and they offer 10% cooldown reduction. If you have Transcendence, then they scale pretty well because they become de facto 20 AP boots once you've hit max cooldown reduction. The other choice is Mobility Boots. These are much more lane focused. They help you roam around, they help you get vision, and they help you set yourself up for engages via your Q or your ult. I personally find myself going for cooldown boots in most of my games at the moment, but if you're finding that you have success with Mobi boots and it's synergizing well with your playstyle, especially if you're very aggressive or you like to roam a lot, then these could be the boots for you. I think that this boot choice between cooldown boots and boots of mobility really just depends on who you are and how you want to play Nami. So I suggest if you've just been sticking to one of these boots, try the other one out and see how it feels for you. Of course, as with any game, if the enemy is full AD or full AP, or even if there's just somebody on the enemy team that's being a real big problem, then you can go for defensive boots. They massively up your survivability, and especially if they're a full AD team or a full AP team, then sacrificing a little bit of your own utility to massively reduce their damage on you is 100% worth it, even if you're ahead. Now let's talk about Nami's core items. First up is a Fiend's Unholy Grail. This item offers mana regen, cooldown reduction, AP, magic resist, and a passive that gives you even more healing. On top of this, it offers a secondary passive that gives you more AP based on your mana regen. All of this is packaged in an item that costs just 2,100 gold, making it one of the cheapest full items in the game. It's an absolute monster on someone like Nami, and you should be thinking about this pretty much every game. In fact, I build this first item in almost every game except for certain specific scenarios that we're going to talk about with our next item, and that item is Ardent Sensor. It's another very good item offering AP, mana regen, movement movement speed, and 10% increased healing and shielding. The bread and butter of this item, however, is its passive that buffs your allies' attack speed for 6 seconds after you heal them. It also gives them on-hit damage, which is really, really good. Usually, I'll be building the second or third item after a Fiend's Unholy Grail. However, in games where I have an auto-attack heavy hyper carry, like a Vayne, Twitch, or a Cogmore, then I'm going to build Ardent Censer straight away. While Grail might be a bigger power spike for me personally, Ardent Censer is a huge power spike when combined with these champions, and these ADCs can do so much with it that it's an absolute must. And now our third and final core item is Redemption. Redemption is another extremely cheap item at just 2,100 gold, the same as Grail. It offers cooldown reduction, health regen, and mana regen. It also offers the same unique passive as Ardent Censer, giving an extra 10% heal and shield power, and it's very important to note that this passive is unique and therefore does not stack if you build both items. For this reason, in games where you build Ardent Censer first, always build a Fiend's Unholy Grail second and not Redemption, or you're wasting a big part of Redemption's stats. And of course, Redemption offers an active ability that allows you to cast a heal and damage area at an extremely long range, which then loads up and heals and damages all enemies and allies that are within its circle. This makes Redemption really, really good if you're team fighting, and it's something that you need to be thinking about if you're trying for a lot of objectives, and especially as a support, if there's a lot of dragon fighting going on early on in the game, then you need to be looking towards Redemption a little earlier. And you should also bear in mind that you can use the Redemption active even when you're dead, so if you happen to get one shot or taken out of the action really quickly, then you will be able to use this and help out even when you're dead. It does, however, have the same range, which will be around the body area where you died. And last up for the build section, we're going to look at Nami's situational items. Now, our first situational item is Locket of the Iron Solari. This is a defensive item. It offers 90 base stats, 60 magic resist, and 30 armor. It also offers an active ability that allows you to cast an AoE shield, including yourself, to all allies in the area. It's an extremely cheap item at just 2,200 gold, and especially for this amount of base stat resists, it's actually really, really good. It's probably my most common item when I need survivability in a game, and it's something that you should always be thinking about, especially if you find that you're dying a lot yourself. Also, if you're team fighting a lot and you feel like you're getting a lot of use out of Redemption, this inherently synergizes well with Redemption, because now you're giving your team AoE heals and AoE shields. Our next core item is Shirelia's Reverie. Typically on enchanters, I'd call this a very niche item, but with Nami, because of your passive, I think this synergizes really well. Shirelia's offers cooldown reduction, base health regen, and base mana regen, and also 10% heal and shield power, but again, it's the unique passive that won't work if you've got Redemption or Ardent. What makes it synergize super well with Nami though, is that it grants you and nearby allies 40% movement speed for 3 seconds. This active ability means that it synergizes really well with the fact that you already speed your allies up when you use abilities on them, so you're more than likely playing around a playstyle where you're often wanting to try and chase people down or speed your allies up so they can avoid skill shots and get the upper hand in fights. This can give a turbocharge to that for some really slick engages or hunt downs after a fight if somebody's trying to escape. And lastly, our final core item is Mikhail's Crucible. This item offers cooldown reduction, mana regen, and magic resist. It also offers the unique heal and shield passive yet again. However, for this one, it offers 20% increased healing and shielding rather than 10%, and that will override the 10% heal and shield power that you get from Ardent Censer, Redemption, or Shirelia's, but once again, it won't stack, it will simply override it. Now, Shirelia's Reverie has a relatively hard active ability to utilize to its fullest extent, but Mikhail's is just probably the hardest active ability support item to use. The timing needs to be on point, and you also need really good decision making to know when to use it and when to let the CC last. This is an item that is super dominant in pro play, but not really seen that much in solo queue, and the win rates tend to agree with this. It's something that I definitely suggest that you use sometimes and you try out maybe in some normal games, because getting to grips with it can make it a really, really powerful item into certain team comps that have a lot of CC that you're going to be able to cleanse and save your ADC. But because of how hard it is to use and the fact that you can't always trust your allies in solo queue, which means that helping them out isn't always the best thing in the world, I think that it's often better to go with Locket or Shirelia's. That said, because of the ability for this to be super powerful if used correctly, I wanted to include it on the list, and I really do suggest that you just try it out and see it for yourself. Now let's talk about some little tips and tricks that are really going to help you master Nami. The first up is maximizing your efficiency on your W bounces. Now this is something that I could probably do a standalone video on, and it's something that you're definitely going to have to learn for yourself, especially when you're in the action. It's often not very very easy to actually make a decision. So it's something that you kind of got to put into your muscle memory and be able to do on autopilot. But because Nami's W has an odd number of bounces, starting your W by targeting an ally or targeting an enemy have different outcomes. To help you get started learning this, I actually often find that on bot lane, somewhat counterintuitively, when you're in a fight, it's often best to start on yourself. It will then bounce to an enemy and then run back to heal your ally. The reason for this is that you're often trying to focus one enemy down with a burst of damage and then hopefully both survive to then kill the other one. You're not often trying to damage both of them at the same time and kill them together, so it's better to get the maximum amount of healing by starting with the heal on either your ADC or yourself, with that damage all focused on just one enemy. This can become even more prominent into the late game, where you have all of this extra healing via Grail and the passives on Ardent Sensor and Redemption, meaning that a W bounce to an ally is worth more than a W bounce to an enemy because your damage has dropped off due to the lack of building damage items, but your healing has skyrocketed due to building enchanter items. Therefore, as you move into the late game, it's more and more reliable to heal yourself or an ally to start off in a team fight to get that extra ally bounce rather than that extra enemy bounce. Like I said, this is something that you're just going to have to learn. There are a ton of situations and we could probably do a whole video on all the things that could come up, but hopefully these couple of little tips will help you get on your way to really understanding the ability and the kind of things that you need to be thinking about in every situation if you really want to master Nami's W. Our second tip involves positioning for your ult. Of course, the first thing that most people think of when they think about using Nami's ult is simply aim it in the direction that will knock up the most enemies. This isn't a bad way to look at it because that is pretty much what you're trying to do, but let's take it a little bit of a step further and look at the things that you need to be thinking about to really use your ult the best you can. So firstly, we need to be thinking about positioning, not just aiming the ult, but positioning yourself in a favorable position to give you the right line of aim is really important. As an enchanter, you're relatively squishy and you don't want to be up in the thick of it. You normally want to be behind pretty much all of your allies, so positioning yourself in a way where your ult is going to be able to go through your allies and the enemies is really important. As we said, if your ult rolls through an ally, they get a movement speed buff, so this is also important to think about. We also want to be thinking about how far the ult is going to travel before it hits enemies. As we said in the ability section, the slow that the enemy receives after being knocked up scales with the distance that the ult traveled, so if you can hit them from a further distance, then that's actually a really good thing. Some other things that we need to be considering are the enemies that we want to knock up. We don't always necessarily want to be just going for the maximum amount of knockups, especially if the enemy has a particularly problematic champion such as a Master Yi or a Jax who's just getting out of control. You might want to be focusing your ult entirely on them. By hitting them with your relatively easy to aim ult and then following up with your Q and then maybe an ignite and your W, you can actually do a lot of damage and have a lot of CC. Hopefully by this point your team has jumped on them and finished the job. Number 3, you can target your ally targetable abilities on the champion icons above the minimap. This can be particularly useful in hectic team fights, or even if you just have a lot of allies that are melee champions and they're all under a tower together. Sometimes it's just hard to aim your abilities, and if you have the time to look at these champion borders, you can make sure that your W or your E goes to the right person at the right time. This is especially useful once you get Ardent Sensor, because if you're just trying to bash a tower down, and like I said, if you've got a lot of melee champions and they're all in one square, then you can make sure that the guy that needs to get the Ardent Sensor buff to do the most tower damage gets the Ardent Sensor buff. And our final tip is also actually not really about Nami, it's about Redemption. Redemption does not do damage to epic monsters. It's just a mistake that I see quite a lot of the time, people trying to use Redemption to steal Baron or steal Dragon. Redemption can be useful to give you vision of the area, especially if you believe the champions that are doing Baron or Dragon are particularly low. You can use Redemption to do damage or to give vision to your allies who might be over the wall and looking for a steal. But if you don't think they're very low and also your allies aren't there to be able to capitalize on that vision and try and steal the objective, then just don't waste Redemption because it doesn't actually do damage to the monsters, so it has no chance to steal it on its own. And we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this has been helpful. Once again, if you've got any questions, then leave a comment. I'm sure I'll get back to you. Or you can come and catch me on stream. I'm live every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.